Thank you, Wes. Really appreciate that, my friend. And welcome everybody to DC Squared Bible Study. I'm so excited that you guys were able to zoom in on tonight. Really excited to be able to share with you our core values. We are absolutely trying to be an irresistible church. And so what we wanted to do during these next 6 weeks, uh, myself and Wes will teach through our six core values. And tonight we're starting with the value of healing. And so I'm excited to start with this value because historically, the church unfortunately has done harm to people. And so what we want to do is create an environment to where we don't cause harm, but we aid in the process of healing. And so one of the things that I realized when I began studying this is that the old church was well intentioned, but the reality is that hurt people really do hurt people. And if we're going to create an environment that facilitates healing, it's imperative that we all engage in the process of healing for ourselves. In the book, The Salt Eaters by Tony Bambara, there's a faith healer by the name of Minnie Ransom, who would always ask the question, "Sweetheart, are you sure you want to be healed?" Which seems like a counterintuitive question, but the reality is healing is a process, and that process takes work. So the question is, do you really want to be healed? Because some of us have been so comfortable in the label of our dysfunction. And so many of us are known by the negativity, by the negative labels that people have given us based on our wounding, right? So you ever been in a conversation with somebody and be like, "Man, you know Keisha from the neighborhood." Be like, "Keisha who? You know Keisha." "No, man, Keisha who?" You go, "Crazy Keisha." And they go, "Oh, yeah, I know you're talking about." Because people sometimes will identify you by your wounds. And so if we're going to create an environment that facilitates healing, it's important for us to engage in the process of healing for ourselves so we don't wound people, right? So here is, are you sure? Minnie Ransom would ask, "Sweetheart, are you sure you want to be healed?" Because sometimes our wounding is so closely connected with our identity. And then number two, it could be costly relationally because people have fallen in love with the broken you and may not be ready for the whole you. And so, they're uncomfortable having different conversations because the whole you is now ready to confront things that the unhealed you really didn't want to touch. So the question is, are you sure you want to be well? Sure you want to be healed? What I want to do tonight is I want to take a look at a couple of passages where Jesus healed some people. But I want to caution us. Because I said engage in the process of healing. I think part of the problem is the church reads when Jesus heals people and they look for the instantaneous healing as opposed to being engaged in the process of healing. Is God able to heal us instantaneous? Absolutely. But the problem is we remain shiftless, waiting on the instantaneous, and we don't engage in the process, which seems unattractive and takes a whole lot longer. And so I want to take a look at a couple of passages where Jesus heals a couple of people. Passage number one, John chapter 5. But what you have is that Jesus is showing up to Jerusalem, and he comes across a man who has been lame for 38 years. And this man has been lame, and he says that He's been lame because when God troubles the waters, he has nobody to put him into the water for him to get his healing. In John chapter 5, starting at verse 6, Jesus says, when Jesus saw him laying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, watch this, do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and he walked. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath. Take note, Jesus says, verse 8, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Matthew chapter 9. Here's another story about a man who was paralyzed, and Jesus is in a home teaching. And the crowd is so dense, it's so packed, that they can't get their friend into the house to get him into the presence of Jesus. Matthew chapter 9, starting at verse 2. Some men brought to him a paralyzed man laying on a mat. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the man, take heart, son, your sins are forgiven. At this, some of the teachers of the law said to themselves, this fellow is blaspheming. Knowing their thoughts, Jesus said, why do you entertain these evil thoughts in your heart? Which is easier to say, that your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sin. So he said to the paralyzed man, watch this, get up, take your mat, and go home. Then the man got up and went home. And when the crowd saw him, they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to man. Watch this. In both instances, Jesus heals the man and tells them, take the mat that you were laying on and go home. Take up your mat and go on your way. Watch this. The traditional religious mind would say that deliverance frees you from the mat. When Jesus says, I want you to take the mat with you. Here it is. It's important for us to be engaged in the process of healing, because healing is a process. Watch this. How do you know, Pastor Kev, how do you know that you're engaged in the process of healing? When you're able to carry your mat, you know you're engaged in the process of healing. What does that mean? Watch this. You know you're engaged in the process of healing when you're able to carry the thing that once carried you. When you're able to carry the thing that once carried you, you know you're in the process of healing. When they know which buttons to push, and those buttons used to take you to a certain place, and now you're able to carry the thing that once carried you, you know you're in the process of healing. When they know how they used to they know what to say to send you off, but now you don't fly off the handle. You know you're in the process of healing when you're able to carry the thing that once carried you. And the mat is a reminder of where you've been. The question is, do you trust God enough to stay in the process even when you can't see instantaneous proof? Do you trust God enough to stay in the process even when you don't see instantaneous proof? Because the church has so conditioned us to instantaneous healing, and when we don't see it, we get so discouraged, we don't engage in the process and become discouraged and begin to doubt when we don't see instantaneous proof. whereby we engage in some education. You have to engage in education even when you don't see instantaneous proof. Some things take study, take time in order. When you go to the gym, you don't expect to see a six-pack after one workout. Do you trust God enough to stay in the process even when you don't see instantaneous proof? So there are four things I want to leave with you as it relates to the process of healing. Number one, it's imperative that we have the ability to acknowledge that maybe we aren't well. Our community, we've come from a heritage of strong people. However, that strength sometimes doesn't enable us to be vulnerable enough to admit that there may be something wrong. And the reason why some of us won't engage in the process of healing is because we can't acknowledge that maybe we've been wounded. Maybe my parents did the best that they absolutely could, but even their best left me with some wounds. And you have to be able to acknowledge that I need to be healed. When you acknowledge that you need to be healed, it allows you to get the next step in the process, which is insight. So my youngest is 14. He started playing football at the age of 5. And so I was kind of roped into coaching these 5 to 8-year-olds when Christopher started playing football. And so we lost a lot, a whole lot. We lost a lot. And so my constant refrain to these young men was, after a loss, my question was, did we learn anything? Now I look around the group and they'd have their head down and some of them would be crying and one would raise their hand. They said, Coach, I learned you don't have to be scared of somebody just because they're bigger. That's excellent, excellent, great insight. Anybody else, did you learn anything? And I was slow to ask Christopher, but he would say something like, I learned that if the line would block, I could do my job. I'd be like, okay, all right. We need to talk about this in the car. But my constant refrain to them is that as long as we learn, we never lose. As long as we learn, we never lose. What am I trying to say? That even in the wounding, if I could get some insight on what it was brought to me to teach me, if I could gain some insight, it's not so much a loss if I could gain some insight into what this wound came to teach me. Insight leads me to step 3, which is action, which as a community, we can be involved in the action, right? So the action, I can help hold you accountable once you've come to a place of insight and you need to and you begin to understand what your next steps are. Right? And for some of us, the next step is talking to a mental health professional. I am a huge advocate for talking to the mental health community. There are times when people want to come to talk to me and they say, Pastor Kev, what do you think I should do? I said, I think you should talk to somebody. And they say, I'm talking to you. I said, no, you need to talk to somebody who has more training than Pastor Kev in this area. Because guess what? Mental health professionals are just as anointed as pastors. You need to talk to somebody. And this community of faith, this community that's going to foster an environment of healing will help hold you accountable to the action items that come about as a result of the insights you gain from the process of healing. And it may take time. It may take a good while. But after you've acknowledged that you've been wounded, after you've gained some insight, after you've come up with some action items, at some point, you may be able to look back and glean some meaning out of what happened. I'm not saying it happens always, But there are times when the painful things teach you some things in life, and you're able to glean meaning even out of some things that were extremely messy. And so tonight, I hope that we all will engage as a community into healing. And we produce an environment of wholeness, and we won't perpetuate harm. And again, I'm not speaking evil of people, because I do understand that hurt people hurt people. But we want to be engaged in the process of healing so we can foster that environment, and we can aid people along the process to acknowledge that they've been hurt, to help them gain some insight, to hold them accountable to some action items, and pray that God shows them that even in the mess, sometimes He's able to teach some meaningful things, even out of some hurtful situations. I hope tonight you got something from the teaching. Let's have a dialogue, and let's talk about what it means to be engaged in the process of healing. Thank you.